All right, here's the screencast for 6.3 part 1. So showing quadrilaterals are parallelograms. So real quick, remember a quadrilateral is a polygon that has 4 quadrilateral sides. So all this is it's a polygon with 4 sides. And remember from the first lesson what a polygon is. Poly means many and gon is sides. So if you have 4 sides, they all must be straight, can be no curves, and they only meet at their endpoints. And it's a closed shape. All right, so if we want to show that a 4-side object is a parallelogram, there's a couple ways to do this. So first, if both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, then the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Okay, so before we talked about what does it mean to be a parallelogram. So now we're using the definition. We're saying, okay, if I have a 4-sided object and the opposite sides, each of the pairs of opposite sides are congruent, then, right, once we show this, once we have this piece of information, then we say, yes, it will be a parallelogram, right? This is how we prove it. This is how we can define it. If we have 2 sets of sides that are congruent, 2 opposite sets of sides, then it will be a parallelogram. All right, if both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, so both pairs, so we have Q and S, P and R, so if both sets are congruent, so I just have a 4-sided object right now. Okay, so I'm checking, are both sets of opposite angles congruent? Oh, guess what? They are. Then we say it is a parallelogram. Perfect. So we want to know, is this quadrilateral a parallelogram? And explain your reasoning. Well, let's check. So I see that this 40 and this 40 congruent. Good. So that's one set. 140 and 140. Awesome. So we say yes, it is a parallelogram. And explain our reasoning. Well, guess what? Opposite angles are congruent. Perfect. All right, let's check it out. I look down here and I see, no, these are not going to be. This is not a parallelogram. Not a parallelogram because opposite angles are not congruent, but they must be congruent. Remember, to be a parallelogram, opposite angles must be congruent to each other. All right, in quadrilateral W, X, Y, Z. So I'm just going to draw W. I don't know what this looks like. So I start with W, and then I'm going to go around this way, and I have to go in the same order. So I'm just drawing a diagram. It's probably not going to be to scale, but at least it gives me something to look at, something to visualize and see. All right, WX is 15, YZ, oops, hold on. YZ is 20. Let's see, XY is 15 and ZW is 20. Now, it was important to draw this out because, check it, right? We have 15, oops, try again. We have 15, 15, okay, so that could be a pair of opposite sides. 20, 20, that could be a pair of opposite sides, but we know this is not a parallelogram. Now, we had to label the diagram correctly. So YZ 20, ZW 20. So the 2 sides that are congruent are not opposite, they're adjacent, they're next to. So this is not a parallelogram. And the reason is because you have to have opposite sides congruent, not adjacent. Here we have adjacent sides congruent. This is not what it means to be a parallelogram. We have to have opposite sides congruent, so this is not going to be a parallelogram. All right, okay, so here are ways proving, right? It's exactly the first 2 things we learned about parallelograms. Opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent. So if we have a 4-sided object where opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, it means it's a parallelogram. And if that's not true, right, if we don't have opposite sides congruent, not a parallelogram. All right, if an angle of a quadrilateral is supplementary to both of its consecutive angles, then the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. So let's take Q, right? If the measure of angle Q plus the measure of angle P is equal to 180. And let's do Q and R. And we have the measure of Q plus the measure of angle R is equal to 180. So both of these must be true. Guess what? Then we can say it is a parallelogram. Has to be consecutive to both. And secretly, the reason for this, if it's going to be consecutive to both of these angles, that would mean that we have a parallelogram because it would mean those sides are parallel. All right. Tell whether the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Explain your reasoning. Okay. So if it is going to be supplementary to both. So I'm going to pick U because we know the two adjacent angles. So if I say the measure of angle U plus the measure of angle T, let's test. Is it 180? Is it? Let's see, 95 plus 85. We're testing. Is it equal to 180? Okay, it is, right? These two, supplementary, good. Now we have to check the other one. But wait, it's the same angle. All right, but we will do it anyway. Measure of angle U plus measure of angle V is 180. So if I add 95 degrees plus 85 degrees, we're testing, and turns out it is true. So because it is supplementary to both of its adjacent angles, it will be a parallelogram. And the reason is because of this theorem, right? So we say angle U is supplementary to both adjacent angles. That is the reasoning we're looking for. It's supplementary to both angles it's next to. Okay. Last one for this part of the screencast. Here we go. So wait, if this is a 90-degree angle and this is a 90-degree angle, we know that two lines that are perpendicular to the same line will be parallel to each other. So because they're parallel, interesting. This is 90, this is 90. That means that these two must also be 90. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, I'm just going to pick this angle. I'm going to test if it's supplementary. D, measure of angle D plus measure of angle A should equal 180. We're testing. Turns out if we have two right angles, they will equal 180. We'll test these two now. Pick a different color. Pick these two now. So I have the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle C. They should equal 180, right? We're testing. Well, D is 90 degrees, C is 90 degrees. So it turns out it is also parallelogram. So say yes, parallelogram, because angle D was supplementary to both adjacent angles. All right, and that's it for the first half of the notes. Perfect.